So good morning, everyone. On behalf of all of my colleagues at the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business, welcome to the 7th Annual Practice Forum. We're thrilled to convene such a fantastic group of fantastic professionals who share our vision of a better world through better business. My name is Abigail Talcott-Schlafer. I'm the Managing Director here at CSB, and I have the distinct honor today of being your Master of Ceremonies. I want to start by thanking our sponsors and our partners, Deloitte, Invest Industrial, Nespresso, Glenmead, and our media partner Fortune for their generous support and partnership in bringing this event to life. I'd also like to thank the entire CSB team and all of our student interns who, for all of the hard work that went into today, making today happen, and for the work that you do year-round to inform the creation of a new sustainable business paradigm. It is your work that helps fill today's packed agenda and fills this room. So today we're going to be focusing on unlocking enterprise value through embedded sustainability. There's considerable dialogue, some of it productive, some not so much, about the costs of sustainability, but what's often missing from the conversation are the upside opportunities to create and capture the value through sustainability. Our program will recognize the challenges, but through the lens of what is necessary to unleash the potential of sustainability to realize financial and societal benefits. So to kick off our programming, it is my pleasure to turn it over to someone who can speak to the diversity of thought and action around sustainability from a leading business media perspective. So please join me in welcoming Alan Murray, the CEO of Fortune Media, for opening remarks.
It's all right? Good. Thank you so much. I hope they're not going to keep that picture up there the whole time I'm talking. It's a little, I feel like someone's watching me. First of all, thanks so much for having me here and letting me make some brief, and I will be brief opening comments for this event. I think it's a really critical moment for the discussion you're going to have today. It's kind of a turning point for the issue of business and sustainability, and I will try and tell you why in the few short minutes I have. As a journalist, I've been watching the intersection between business and society for 4 decades now, and I particularly focused over the course of the last 10 or 15 years on the rise of stakeholder capitalism, ESG, call it whatever you want to call it, that there was an increased focus on the part of the business leaders that I was talking to on their contributions to society as well as their profits. And you know, when I first started hearing this a decade ago, I was skeptical because that's what journalists do. You know, we're skeptical, some would say cynical, about things like this. And I thought, you know, is this just a talking point? Is this just public relations? Are they all talking to the same media master who's giving them the same talking points? And so I spent a lot of time over the course of the decade trying to figure out where this was coming from and why it was happening. And I came to the conclusion, I wrote this in my book, Tomorrow's Capitalist, if you want to go deeper, but I came to the conclusion that it was the result of fundamental changes in the way businesses create value and in the way businesses are managed. I say the way businesses create value because if you think about the 20th century corporation, it was really very much about amassing the capital you needed to acquire the plant, acquire the equipment, acquire the oil in the ground or the inventory in the shelves or whatever the physical stuff was you needed to create value. And so capital was very important. Physical accumulation was very important to the creation of value. But if you look at businesses in the 21st century, it's a very different story. It's much more about intangibles. It's much more about intellectual property. It's much more about things that are tied more closely to human beings, to, assembling the best talent or creating an emotional connection with your customers that allows you to win. So the whole nature of value creation in the 21st century is different than it was in the 20th century. And the nature of managing large organizations has become very different. I mean, the 20th century corporation was kind of an information hierarchy where you had people out in the field and they were doing things and they were gathering information and all the information would be sent up to the C-suite and a group of people would sit in a boardroom in the C-suite and come up with a strategy, and then the orders would flow back down the line. I think everybody in this room understands you can't run a business that way today. Things happen too fast. Power has been pushed out to the edges. And as a result, leadership has become much more about inspiring, engaging, creating a North Star, getting a group of people to find a purpose greater than themselves that will make them do the great work that will allow the company to succeed. And so I think both of those things have powered this movement we've seen over the last decade to put an increased emphasis on the problems of people and planet, on what were once considered social and governmental goals. But the reason I say this is such a critical moment for this discussion is because obviously we've had a lot of political pushback over the last couple of years, and there is no question that it's having a big effect. I mean, you've got red state attorney generals who were suing financial institutions for using ESG screens that they view as discriminating against fossil fuel businesses in their states. You've got conservative legal groups bringing lawsuits against companies for using race-based criteria in contracting or in hiring, using the arguments of the Supreme Court case against affirmative action in universities to question those. And then you see, social media attacks on companies like Target or AB InBev that are seen as being woke, that have significant effect. I mean, the Bud Light story is astonishing. It was, I think, a 20% drop in sales. So all of these things are very, very real, and companies are responding to them. And there's just been a pretty dramatic reduction in the willingness to talk about what you're talking about today. I was sitting, just last week, I was in a meeting with the chief marketing officer of one of the big New York financial institutions that over the years has frequently promoted its forward-leaning position on climate or on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this chief marketing officer literally said, we were saying, what can we at Fortune do to help you? What are the messages you're trying to get across? And the CMO said, well, the one thing we're not trying to do is talk about sustainability or diversity. So we don't need any more controversy. We have enough controversy as it is. Very straightforward, very clear. This is not something that we want to talk about in the current environment. So anyone who has any question about whether the political pushback is affecting corporations, I think there's no question it is. But here's what's interesting about the moment is I still find incredible things going on at the largest and best companies, particularly on the sustainability front. Use Walmart as an example. I mean, here's a company that is headquartered in a red state. It's the largest company in the world, headquartered in a red state, does much of its businesses in red states. The CEO, grew up loading trucks. No one would ever think of him as a woke CEO. But at their earnings call just a couple of weeks ago for the fourth quarter, he made a remarkable statement. It didn't get a lot of attention because they didn't put out a press release. They weren't trying to trumpet it. He didn't spend a lot of time on it. But they had started a program that some of you are probably familiar with called Project Gigaton. It's a pretty incredible program. Basically, they went out to their suppliers and said, we're going to work with you to take a gigaton of emissions out of the environment. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. That's a lot. That's a big deal. At first they had 4,000. I think at the latest they have 5,000 of their suppliers engaged in this program. And if any of you have ever been suppliers to Walmart, I think you know that when Walmart says, hey, we think it's a good idea if you do X, that you do X. So, I mean, it comes pretty close to being a regulatory program. And the idea was to get a gigaton out by 2030. Doug McMillan said at the earnings call, it was almost like as a passing comment, they made the goal 6 years early. 6 years early. I don't know if you're with Walmart, but it's a pretty big deal. And you're not seeing advertisements about it. They didn't put a press release out about it, but they did it. And I think that's pretty extraordinary. And I keep running in. I spend a lot of my time talking to CEOs for our events, for podcasts, just people who come by the office, probably, a dozen a month, 100 or more every year. And I keep finding these remarkable stories. Air Products Corporation, which services the oil and gas industry, been around for a long time, run by a guy named of Iranian extraction, a guy named Seifi Ghasemi, who's in September is going to turn 80 years old. So this is not a young millennial pushing environmental programs. I mean, he's core to the oil and gas industry, but he has invested $1 billion in clean hydrogen, and he's gotten beat up in the stock market for doing it. And what he says is, look, I know 100 years from now, this is going to be the fuel that we use to power the planet. And I'm going to get in front of it because I want this company to be, by the way, when he talks about it, he sounds like he's going to be the guy 100 years from now who's doing it. But he said, I want to make sure that this company gets in front of it. The GM saga is fascinating to watch. I mean, 2021, Mary Barra said, we're only going to make non-emitting cars by 2035. The market wasn't ready for that. The market still isn't ready for that. She's getting significant pushback because of that, but saying we're going to do this because we have to get ahead of the business. I could go on, but I think the most far-sighted leaders in business today are saying we're going to do this because this is where business is going, and if we don't do it, we're going to be in serious trouble, and they don't want to talk about it. We've kind of moved from the age of greenwashing, which there was a lot of a few years ago, to what I refer to as woke whispering. I mean, saying we're going to be quiet about it. We're going to do it, but we're not going to talk as much about it. Now, at the margins, there are a lot of companies that 2 years ago were feeling pressure to get on the bandwagon that aren't feeling that pressure anymore right now. So you see a lot fewer new commitments to 2050 goals or 2030 goals because the laggards aren't feeling the pressure that they were feeling to get on board. But the people at the forefront are doing incredible things, and the movement keeps going. It was Milton Friedman who laid out the classic economics framework that said the purpose of business is to make a profit, and if we have externalities like climate, well, let the government take care of that. I think we all know what the problem with that theory is in the United States today. We don't have a government that's very good at addressing practical problems, addressing any problems at all. It's not functional. And I think the most far-sighted business leaders realize that, sure, in the short term, there are lots of trade-offs between profitability and sustainability, profitability and benefit to society. Anybody who has been in a C-suite can recognize that there are hundreds of things you can do in the next quarter that will make your numbers look better, that will be bad for people and planet. But as the time frame gets longer, all those things start to melt away. And what we're seeing is that the companies that say, I want to make sure I'm around 50 years from now, 100 years from now, that I'm dominating this business, that they're focusing more and more on this because they have to, because they know that's where the world is going. The economic logic has gotten baked in. So that's why I say this is such an interesting moment. We're at a very different place. And I would add that's why this conversation is so important, because what's going to get more companies on board is to fully understand, explain, explore, and publicize the business logic. You have to do this not for political reasons, not because somebody's telling you it's the right thing to do, not because of op-ed pieces or books that say this is where we have to go. You have to do this because this is what's going to allow your business to survive and thrive into the future. And I actually think at the end of the day, that's a good thing that we're at that point. I'm glad that we've gotten down to focusing on the business case. The greenwashing has gone away. People are doing it now because they believe it makes sense for the business. Again, a couple of other conversations. I've got a minute left. But Rolls-Royce is an example. New CEO, I talked to the CEO recently. The previous CEO had made a big investment in sustainable fuels. The new CEO said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, because that's not what we do. We make jet engines. But what I'm going to do is make sure every jet engine we make is adaptable for sustainable fuels. Well, that strikes me as the right business decision. Even Exxon, okay, somebody's going to throw something at me here, right? Because Exxon is the Darth Vader of this conversation. And God knows if you want to talk about the past, we can, I've been gaslit myself, so I know the story. But even Exxon is talking about this in a very different way, and they're getting some grief for it because people are saying, hey, why aren't you doing what BP is doing? Why aren't you investing in solar panels and wind farms? And what Exxon is saying is, no, that's not really what we do. That's not our expertise. Our expertise is molecules. By the way, that statement alone is, I don't think I ever heard Exxon in the past say our expertise was in molecules. They said their expertise was oil and gas. Said our expertise is molecules. So if we're going to contribute to this transition, the place where we can contribute is in hydrogen. And they've invested a significant amount in hydrogen transportation systems. And so the world is changing. The world is changing in the right direction. It's not changing fast enough. I'm not speaking fast enough because I got zeros on the clock right here. And business is changing, and I think the key now for continuing progress is to continue to show the business case for change. And I think that's why all of you are here today, and happy to be a part of it. Thank you.